Hello and welcome to the final presentation of my graduation project. Thank you for being here today. This project will mark the end of my master's studies in Design for Interaction at the Delft University of Technology, and I'm excited to share with you what I've been working on for the past 6 months. In recent years, the field of design, including that of industrial design, continued to broaden its scope. Instead of solely providing concrete product solutions to concrete problems, designers nowadays commonly work in interdisciplinary teams, design systems rather than actual objects, and use their expertise to tackle big societal issues. One of these big societal issues concerns our climate. When you hear the word climate, your mind most probably immediately makes the jump to climate change. And that is not surprising. The levels of CO2 in our atmosphere are rising, coral reefs are dying, and the number and intensity of heat waves and wildfires increases every year. The news are filled with reports of our impact on the planet. Yet, despite our best personal efforts, these news seldom seem to be positive or of a hopeful nature, but rather get worse and worse. Any curiosity we might feel towards our climate gets overshadowed by the fear of what we might find, assuming to already know the answer. An answer that will make us feel guilty, outraged, sad, and most probably hopeless. There's a quote by the designers Dunn and Raby that really resonated with me throughout the project, especially when getting into the climate context. As they fittingly put it, "There are no more visions. We don't know how to fix the planet and ensure our survival. We are just hopeful." Part of why climate change is so difficult to tackle is because it's a global issue by nature. It is a collective issue, too big to be understood and solved by one person, one project, or even one country alone. We are in dire need to use every tool available to us to have a chance. Artificial intelligence, or AI for short, is one of these tools, able to draw upon and use vast amounts of data, more information than any human mind can comprehend at any given point. It has the potential to support us by finding new relationships and perspectives that as humans might not be able to see ourselves. An important side note, despite its long existence, the terminology of AI is still quite fuzzy, with different definitions floating around. Nowadays, AI is often used as an umbrella term for various types of advanced algorithms, or the broad field of computer science that focuses on building smart machines and systems. Throughout this presentation, I will use the term AI also as an umbrella term to represent the field, but more on that later. AI is already used to research the technical side of our climate's past, present, and future. However, as you have seen before, climate is not solely a logical issue, but evokes strong emotions and is driven by them in return. Fear and hopelessness, which most of us feel when hearing about climate change, might not be suitable long-term motivators for most people, especially if the threat still seems quite distant. On the contrary, research has shown that an overwhelming amount of negative emotions might lead to a lack of interest, apathy, and ultimately public disengagement, while the use of positive emotions appear to play an important role in public support for climate policies. Positive emotions have the potential to evoke an active interest, provoke further learning, and increase awareness of the issue. Considering the ability of AI to tackle complex problems, it begs the question, how could we use it to understand and influence the emotional side of climate change as well, and use it to encourage engagement instead? For my self-initiated graduation project with the title AI for Experience, Designing with Generative Adversarial Networks to Evoke Climate Fascination, I had the ambition to bring the notions of design, climate, and AI together. The aim of the project was to transform climate data through AI into a playful experience. By making it engaging and immersive for stakeholders beyond the scientific community, the project goal was also to pave the way for further work that might foster public climate engagement. In the initial phase of my research, I conducted a deep dive into climate literature and talked with climate scientists about their work, all with the purpose to get a better understanding of the space and position my project. When talking to the researchers, I found their continuous excitement and fascination that they felt for their work really inspiring. Even while being more than aware of the challenges of climate change, they could still see the beauty in the countless interactions going on in our climate system every day. These researchers also supported what I found in literature, that the issue is not only one of graphs and numbers, but an emotional one. I decided to use these insights and the fascination that I could feel in the researchers to form my first design goal, which would guide me through my ideation. My design goal of the project was to create an experience, driven by AI, that allowed people to feel an engaging fascination for our world's climate again. Simultaneously, I used my journey of designing the experience to explore and reflect on how AI technology can or can't be used in my design process. For parts of this project, I had the fortune to collaborate with a team of Google AI, one of the leading companies on the forefront of AI development. Coincidentally, two of Google's most well-known products, Google Maps and Google Earth, is how most people experience a form of climate data nowadays. But what if you would use this visual form of climate data, the vast amounts of satellite imagery, not only to represent the current version of our Earth, but use it instead to open up a speculation for the future and what might be? The final design outcome of my graduation project is LANDSHAPES, an interactive installation intended for the museum context. To get an impression of the design, I would like to show you a short video. As I said earlier, LANDSHAPES is an installation intended for a museum or gallery context. Framing it as an art piece and placing it in a gallery presents the design not as a solution-driven product, but as a place to find wonder and get inspired. The center of the installation is the circular projection of AI-generated aerial landscapes, images that look real, yet have never been seen by anyone before. Earth imagery taken from space possesses an unmistakable beauty, and shows a view most people will never experience in their lives. The shapes and colors invite us to explore the details of the landscape and appreciate its appeal. At the same time, those images, taken from a far distance, only suggest details of the landscape and provokes the viewer to fill in these missing pieces with their imagination. This perspective allows the viewer to be detached from reality, if only for a brief moment, and quite literally puts the emphasis on the bigger picture. However, we are not passive beings when it comes to our planet and its climate. A pushable handle, following the shape of the railing, allows the visitor to become an active participant in the installation, to move along with the changing artwork, stop it from changing, and ultimately experience the potential impact on our surroundings in a playful, open-ended manner. The installation evokes a new perspective on the world, as the moving landscapes show it not as static, but as an ever-changing entity, open to be shaped by the vision of any daring hand. The underlying AI, trained on images from all around the world, functions as a neutral mediator of the experience. With the potential to depict any possible landscape, it is not the designer who imposes a vision of a speculative future, but the creation being the result of a collaboration between the machine and the guiding visitor. Now, before discussing potential benefits and limitations of the design, I would like to take a step back and take a look at my design process and the technology that led to the final outcome. For this project, I chose empirical research through design as a method to explore, gather knowledge, and converge towards the final design. In my iteration process, guided by literature and interviews with climate scientists, I discovered that there's a need for experiences free of an immediate agenda, which helps build a bridge between people and the ongoing climate debate. Building various prototypes, always guided with a specific research question, allowed me to get quick user feedback on concept directions, as well as build up knowledge of the underlying AI technology. In my intermediate prototypes, I was using pre-trained AI models and the element of fascination and curiosity in combination with the element of play to evoke user engagement. Games and play in general have a strong potential to be engaging. While some of my ideas were game concepts with rules and objectives, I quickly saw and decided that a more abstract concept with a playful interaction could be more suitable to fulfill my project goal. In addition, I used the method of playing and tinkering with these AI models myself as a way of understanding them better and explore their future use. The technology I'm using for this project is a so-called Generative Adversarial Network, or GAN for short. GANs are a type of machine learning first proposed by Ian Goodfellow and his team back in 2014. That are designed to produce new content that resembles the data it was trained on. The machine learning structure behind a GAN consists of two competing networks, a generator and an opposing discriminator. To give a simplified overview, when trained on a data set, the generator produces new data to mimic the structure identified in the given data. The discriminator's job is to identify if the newly produced data is authentic or artificially generated. Through the process of generating, assessing and adjusting, the GAN learns to produce new data with increasing fidelity and realism. Over the past years, the popularity and capability of GANs increased a lot. If you look at the examples of face generation with GAN models, the substantial progress of the past year is clearly visible. GANs can be trained on various data, like images, videos, sounds or text, making it a versatile tool with numerous use cases. At a conference in 2020 titled GANs for Good, Ian Goodfellow presented some more examples of how this technology can be and is already used in practice.
Now that GANs are working really well, it's interesting to study them and learn how to apply them to different tasks. For example, Glidewell Dentistry has been able to use them to make replacement dental crowns. Traditionally, it took a human technician about 2 weeks to do this. With a GAN, it's possible to 3D print the new crown on site and get everything done in 1 day. At Apple, some of my colleagues have found other applications of GANs. In augmented reality, we often want to insert objects into a real scene. In the upper left, we see what it would look like if we rendered the teapot with reflections showing only things that are available in the incomplete environment map. This is the part of the environment that the camera can actually see. The camera has no way of observing anything like the ceiling, the walls, the lighting of the room. This is where GANs come in. We can fill in the missing part of the environment map, as shown on the right. It's actually using our knowledge of the statistical structure of the world to understand things like that the ceiling tends to be relatively plain, and that lights tend to be near the ceiling. Given this completed environment map, we're now able to make much better rendered reflections.
A variety of pre-trained GANs are available through online services, such as Runway or Artbreeder. Both are platforms that aim at making machine learning more accessible for creatives. Those GANs allowed me to generate hundreds of different assets in a short time and use them in my prototypes. However, GANs, or AI in general, are by no means a silver bullet and present a variety of issues that complicate their usage. The ones I encountered in my exploration include controllability, resource and time intensity, lacking transparency, and lacking accessibility. While it is quite easy to get something out of a GAN, it is hard to control the exact output, with research on how to do it still being in its early stages. Training a GAN also requires a lot of data, time, and computational hardware to train and produce usable results. While doing so, it is hard to judge the output and training process of a GAN, especially with an added layer of abstraction like Runway, and no access to the source files of the network that might allow further analysis. When getting started, access to data, the source files, but also just access to knowledge required to work with GANs can be a challenge. This is further complicated by specific domain lingo that not everyone might be familiar with. As a response to the challenges I just described, to have further influence on the output, but also to experience myself what additional challenges it might bring, I decided to train my own GAN. From my initial exploration, I knew that GANs act a bit like a mirror. What you show them, they reflect back, even though in a distorted and novel way. To build the experience I envisioned, I needed a diverse dataset of a few thousand images in high resolution that the network could be trained on. I built a pipeline using openly accessible Google services, Google Earth Engine and Google Colab to export thousands of satellite images provided by the European Space Agency and save them in my Google Drive. Here are some of the beautiful landscapes I discovered while going through the collected examples, ranging from deserts over colorful coastlines to lush forests and Arctic ice sheets. After cleaning up the dataset, meaning I applied some basic color and exposure correction as well as deleting some unsuitable outliers, I could start the GAN training process. Again, using Google Colab and code provided by NVIDIA for their popular style GAN model, I let the training run over multiple days for a total duration of roughly 100 hours. What you see here is the so-called transfer learning process. In transfer learning, you take a pre-trained network, like this one that was trained on faces, and feed it new data. Over time, with each new training iteration, the network slowly starts to recognize and learn patterns in the new data and is able to replicate the characteristics. There are also metrics to assess the training process and fidelity of a GAN. However, as running those metrics increases the training time by quite a bunch, and as I was only looking for an aesthetic output, I chose to judge the training samples by eye, rather than a numeric score. With the trained GAN and access to the source files, I can do a number of things. I can produce either a vast amount of random samples, take an existing image and project it back into the latent space of the GAN, meaning to find the closest representation that it is able to generate. Or I can interpolate between a selection of images. The interpolation results in some beautiful, mesmerizing morph animations, which will also be the main driver of my installation. With the trained style GAN model producing sufficiently satisfying high-resolution results, I was able to finally move on and use it to validate my design concept. Mostly, I was interested to answer the following questions. How will participants respond emotionally to the different visuals projected at full scale? How does the addition of a control mechanism influence the experience in terms of engagement? And lastly, how would participants interpret the visuals and the open narrative of the installation? Due to COVID and living in the middle of the pandemic, it was not possible for me to build a full-fledged installation for the final validation. Instead, I pre-exported 3 videos with different controllable characteristics. The variety of landscapes depicted in the video, the speed of interpolation between landscapes, and if it was a looping video or not. The user testing of the final prototype indicated that the design has the potential to evoke an emotional response, and the participants also managed to build the connection to the climate without a surrounding narrative. The installation, with the generated landscape visuals as the main feature, was described as beautiful, engaging, and overall a pleasant experience. The testing suggests that the highest engagement and positive emotional response would be provoked by slow-moving and detailed videos. However, fast and drastic changes could also be used to evoke a feeling of urgency and confusion, to trigger a potential more negative emotional response. I found it very interesting to see that the lack of a clear narrative surrounding the installation motivated participants to come up with their own little stories to fill in the gaps. Some imagined a story of the planet and the rise and fall of civilizations, see an evolution in the images, or imagine a meta-narrative for the installation as an experience of change and change of the environment themselves. The addition of a control device changed the experience from passive to active engagement. While it added an extra benefit for some participants, it also had the potential to take away from the meditative experience of just looking at the beautiful visuals, as some described it. This insight supports my design decision to offer an input opportunity to influence installation, but not place it as a necessity for people to use it to enjoy the experience. Coming to the conclusion of my thesis. To summarize, over the past 100 days I explored how to utilize generative adversarial networks as a design tool. Through conducted interviews with climate researchers and literature review into the topic of climate change, I discovered that the current climate debate is deeply emotional, with mostly negative emotions like fear and perceived hopelessness in its center. Yet, I also found that fostering positive emotions like fascination and joy is a potential means to increase interest and motivate people to engage with climate initiatives. The final design of this exploration is the concept of an interactive exhibition piece that allows its users to influence novel AI-generated landscapes. The evaluation of the installation showed that it evoked a deep sense of beauty, calmness, and inspiration that contributed to a meditation-like, engaging experience. It therefore answers the set out design goal to make users feel an engaging fascination for a world climate system, although in a rather artistic and nuanced fashion. The design research conducted in this project supports the assumption that experiences with positive emotion in its center can be used to foster initial engagement with the topic of climate change. Furthermore, it showed that GAN technology can be used to evoke an emotional response, which offers interesting opportunities for future work. However, no project comes without its limitations, and mine is no exception. The COVID pandemic certainly hindered my process and testing of physical prototypes, forcing me to validate digital counterparts instead, and building the final experience only in an altered form. For this reason, further validation of the full final concept with all its details still remains. I was also limited by what one person, me in this case, without any prior technical knowledge can do in the span of 100 days. My design is also certainly influenced by the technology of my choosing, making the final concept only one of many possible designs to answer the set-out project goal. My decision to use GANs as the underlying technology sometimes slowed down my design process, forcing me to overcome technical challenges instead. However, with the solution space being nearly endless, it also guided me in my ideation and gave me a place to start, while simultaneously allowing me to fulfill a personal ambition to finally work with machine learning myself. Due to these limitations, I don't see the final design as a static, concluding piece, but rather as one iteration with potential to be built upon with future work. This project once started with a grand aspiration and the vision of making whole climate models playable and accessible to people. While it became clear that this aspiration would be outside the scope of this project, the positive validation of my design exploration shows the potential for a variety of future work opportunities in this direction. The first clear opportunity is to iterate on my final design concept and build it in a fully functional model to be exhibited in a museum context of a post-COVID world. In my research, I also came across a number of fascinating real-world climate stories, for instance that of the flying Amazon River. To quickly tell the story, the Amazon in Brazil, with its more than 400 billion trees, covers more than 40% of South America and is one of the biggest forests in the world. Each of those trees produces valuable oxygen and evaporates over 1,000 liters of water into the atmosphere. Together, all trees produce 20 trillion liters of water vapor every day. Winds from the coast then transport these masses of water inland towards the Andes, making it the biggest river in the world, and a flying one at the same time. I see a clear potential to enrich a surrounding exhibition by showcasing these stories and to spark not only a general fascination, but one more targeted towards our climate and its working. The final concept of LANDSHAPES builds upon a simple, unidirectional interaction that allows visitors to push for change in the shown landscapes, yet not influence any specific parameters of the created world. And still, it showed the potential around engaging in aesthetically pleasing climate experiences. With access to more data, time and hardware resources, like found in my collaboration partner Google, it is not far-fetched to envision a version of LANDSHAPES that truly enables visitors to shape and explore a landscape based on their imagination. A contemporary version of a playable Earth, like once attempted with SimEarth, might be a valuable approach to let users engage with climate data and its beauty in a playful way. And lastly, the evaluation of LANDSHAPES showed the ability of GANs to produce media that evokes an emotional response in the viewer. These first research results present the opportunity to measure these perceived emotions and their intensity, and then feed them back into the GAN as additional training data. A hypothesis might be that it is possible to use a GAN, trained on perceived emotions, to produce imagery that evokes or counteracts a specific emotional response in the viewer. I do not think that this ability to influence emotion is by all means desirable, yet it does provoke interesting ethical questions about our envisioned future relationships of AI and human emotions. When starting this project 6 months ago, I knew that my deep dive into the two domains of climate research and AI, both of which I knew very little about, would be challenging and connected to a lot of uncertainty. I realize now that I only scratched the tip of the iceberg, with so much more to explore. Yet, I don't see this as a demotivation, but rather an exciting prospect of future exploration. If you want to know more about my project and my exploration journey, feel free to take a look at my thesis report. The link to the documents is in the video description. Thank you for taking the time today and listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. Perhaps this presentation and the shown content evoked a bit of the fascination and wonder in you that I myself felt while working on the project. And maybe it helped you see our world in a slightly different light, as a beautiful and fascinating system that it is.